Under the dimming skies of a late western evening, the world felt stitched together by dust and silence. Wind brushed against the crooked fence posts that lined the Pike homestead, carrying the faint creak of weathered boards and the sour tang of stale whiskey that seeped from the house like an unholy incense. Beyond that cracked porch, two young women pressed themselves close to one another, their hands laced so tightly their knuckles whitened. They had been whispering the same words for hours, their plea breaking upon the air like waves against an unyielding stone. "Please let us stay, please." It was not a prayer offered to God alone, it was a plea meant for anyone who might hear. And though they did not yet know it, someone did. Clara May Pike, no more than 20 years, had the kind of face one did not forget, round, tender, carrying the fragility of a girl who had spent too much time waiting for life to be merciful. Beside her was Evelyn, older by 5 years and tempered by hardship, the bones of her face sharper, her eyes shaded by unspoken vows to protect the sister she loved. Evelyn's right palm bore a long-healed scar, a cruel reminder of the day she gripped a branding iron to save their mother from a falling flame. The wound had closed, but the mark remained, and with it a truth: Evelyn had been protecting others for far too long, and still the world demanded more. Inside the house, the source of their torment bellowed with laughter. Jedediah Pike, their brother, was just shy of 30 but already hollowed by cruelty and greed. He had inherited little of their father's land and none of his laboring strength, preferring instead to barter flesh and blood for coin. With every swig of his bottle, the decision hardened in his heart. His sisters would be wed to Harlan Briggs, a rancher of 40 years whose name was whispered in the saloon not for honor but for violence. Harlan's hands were known to strike before words, his breath always soaked in rotgut whiskey, and his pockets always empty. But empty pockets sought to fill themselves, and Jedediah had agreed to sell his sister's futures for a sum just large enough to keep him in liquor and smoke. Evelyn had heard the deal struck with her own ears. She had stood in the hallway shadows as Jedediah muttered and chuckled with Briggs, the two of them making bargains as if lives were livestock. Clara had cried when Evelyn told her, her small frame shaking until Evelyn feared she would shatter like porcelain. But there was nowhere to run, no kin to flee toward, no sanctuary to claim. The frontier did not forgive women wandering alone. Their voices grew smaller each day, until their whispers barely stirred the air. Yet even whispers can travel far in the silence of the plains. For on that very evening, as the sky bled into a rust-red horizon, Silas Boone rode past the Pike homestead. His stallion's hooves struck muted thuds against the dry earth, the animal's breath steaming faintly in the cooling air. Boone was 30, his name known across the territory, wealthy by cattle and land, strong by the labor of his own hands and cursed, so the town whispered, with solitude. He had built his ranch with sweat, but filled it with silence, refusing company, refusing closeness. Folks in town spoke of him as if he were carved from the same stone as the Maces, handsome but cold, untouchable. Yet as he passed the Pike land, his reins slackened and his gaze lingered. Through the warped glass of a window, he glimpsed Clara's face pressed against Evelyn's shoulder, her eyes swollen from tears. He saw the thin outline of Jedediah pacing with bottle in hand. Boone had no business watching. He had told himself many times that other people's pain was not his to carry. Yet something in Clara's hunched frame and Evelyn's rigid stance twisted inside him. He thought of his own mother, who once stood much the same when Boone was a boy, pleading for mercy from a husband whose cruelty was as predictable as the setting sun. Boone's jaw tightened, his breath grew heavy, and though he urged his horse forward, he did not leave. He circled once, then tethered the animal by a thicket, waiting in the shadows with a stillness that belied the storm within him. Inside, the storm had already broken. Jedediah's voice rose, thick with drink. "You'll do as I say, both of you. Briggs wants wives and wives you'll be. He's paying me good money, and I won't have you spoiling it with your whining." Clara whimpered, clutching Evelyn's arm. Evelyn's eyes burned like iron pulled from a fire, but she said nothing. To speak was to invite blows, and she had borne enough of those to know silence could sometimes shield more than words. But silence would not shield forever. Jedediah leaned close, the stink of whiskey spilling into their lungs. "Tomorrow," he growled, "the preacher will see you bound, and if you run, if you fight, I'll drag you by your hair and throw you at his feet myself." Clara's tears broke again, but Evelyn's lips curled into a smile so slight it could have been mistaken for nothing at all. It was not joy but defiance, the kind of defiance that comes when all else is lost. She thought, if he throws me I will not rise. Better to fall into earth than into the arms of Briggs. But before the night could claim them, the sound of boots struck the porch. 3 heavy steps. Jedediah turned, startled, as the door swung open. Silas Boone filled the threshold, his broad frame shadowing the light of the moon. He did not speak at once, only let the silence stretch, heavy as iron, his eyes settling on Jedediah with the patience of a predator. The sisters froze, breath caught in their throats, their minds torn between hope and dread. For Boone was a stranger to them, and strangers rarely brought salvation. Jedediah barked a laugh, though his hand twitched near the pistol on the table. "Well, look what the dust blew in. The mighty Boone himself. What's a rich man want with my pitiful shack?" Boone's voice, when it came, was calm, so calm it rattled more than a shout. "I came for them." He tilted his head toward Evelyn and Clara, whose eyes widened as if their very souls had been seized. Jedediah grinned, a wolf's grin. "Them? What would a man like you want with two trembling birds? Unless—" his grin split into laughter. "Unless you're fixing to wed them both." Boone did not laugh. He stepped farther into the room, his boots grinding against the warped floorboards. "That's exactly what I intend." His words hung there, impossible, unshakable. Evelyn gasped, Clara choked back a sob. Jedediah slapped his knee and roared with drunken amusement. "You'll marry 'em both? Lord above, Boone, the town will call you mad." But Boone's eyes never left his, and the laughter faltered. For there are men who speak to fill a room, and there are men whose silence empties it. Boone was the latter, and Jedediah, though drunk, felt the weight of that silence. Evelyn's heart pounded so hard she thought it might tear her apart. She wanted to speak, to refuse, to demand answers, but no words came. Clara's hand clung to hers with desperate force, her eyes wide and shimmering, torn between terror and impossible relief. Boone turned then not to them but toward the door. "It will be done tomorrow," he said, his tone neither soft nor harsh but absolute. And with that, he left, leaving behind only the echo of his promise and the stunned silence of those who had no choice but to follow it. The sisters stood long into the night, hardly daring to breathe. Evelyn's thoughts tangled. What kind of man would bind himself to two women he did not know? Was this kindness or another form of cruelty wearing a gentler mask? Clara, though trembling, whispered, "Maybe he's different. Maybe—" Her voice broke before the word could finish. Evelyn held her tighter, her own doubts sharp as knives. Tomorrow would tell, though tomorrow already felt like it was racing toward them on a runaway horse. And outside, by the thicket, Boone mounted his stallion once more. His hands shook faintly on the reins, though no one could see. He did not know why he had spoken the words he did, only that once spoken they felt like iron chains, binding him as tightly as the vows he intended. He thought of the sisters' faces, the hollow ache in their eyes, and something deep within him whispered that for once solitude was no longer enough. The night closed around him as he rode into the dark, carrying with him the weight of a choice that would alter not only their fates but his own. And so, beneath a sky heavy with stars, the path of three souls shifted forever, though none could yet see where it might lead.